The wind carried a strange stillness that night. Snowflakes drifted softly through the air, catching the dim glow of the half moon. Beyond the edge of a broken village, a small cottage stood alone, roof cracked, walls thin, yet smoke still rose from its crooked chimney. Inside lived Eleanor, the only soul left among the ruins. She was young, barely 18, with quiet eyes that had learned to live without expecting kindness. Her parents had died when fever swept through the valley, leaving her to fend for herself among empty houses and cold winds. She found comfort in small things: the sound of rain, the warmth of a candle, and a habit she could never quite explain: leaving food by the old stone wall every night. Not for people, for the raven. It had started the winter before. The bird appeared one evening as she was crying near her doorstep, its dark wings gleaming under the moonlight. It landed a few feet away and simply watched her. No sound, no threat, just quiet presence. From then on, every night it came, and every night she left it a piece of bread or a bit of soup. Sometimes she spoke to it softly, as if it could understand. "You're the only one who visits me anymore," she whispered once, setting down a crust of bread. "Maybe you get lonely too." The raven tilted its head, its eyes glimmering with something more than hunger. That night, when Eleanor went inside and closed her door, the raven stayed. It watched the faint light of her candle flicker behind the thin window. Then, when the village fell silent, its body began to shift, feathers giving way to pale skin, wings folding into a long black cloak. The raven was gone. And in its place stood Cale, a man with eyes the color of winter storms. He stood still for a long time, his breath heavy with the weight of centuries. He watched the faint smoke curl from Eleanor's chimney and whispered to the night, "She has your kindness, Mira." But no one heard him. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find her offering untouched, the bread still lying near the wall, frozen by frost. She frowned and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Where did you go?" she murmured, scanning the bare branches above. The raven didn't come that night, nor the next. By the third evening, her heart ached with a strange loneliness she couldn't name. It wasn't just about the bird. It was the silence that came with its absence, as if something invisible had been taken away. She lit a candle and stood by the old wall, whispering, "If you're hurt, I'll wait for you." "I promise." And somewhere deep in the forest, Cale heard her voice. He hadn't meant to stay away, but her words haunted him. He was a creature cursed, a vampire once bound by a vow he failed to keep. The gods had turned him into a raven until he repented. But every time he saw Eleanor's face, her gentleness, her loneliness, he remembered the woman he couldn't save 100 years ago, Mira. The name was carved in his heart like a blade. He told himself Eleanor was just a reflection, a coincidence. Yet each night, when she whispered to the wind, something inside him stirred. So he returned. Under the moon's pale glow, the raven landed again near her cottage. Eleanor gasped softly, her eyes lighting up like candles. "You came back." She set down a bowl of soup and crouched near it. "I thought maybe the cold got you." The raven tilted its head again, watching her hand tremble slightly from the chill. It hopped closer, close enough for her to feel the soft brush of its wing against her wrist. "You're warm," she murmured. "How strange." That night, when she returned inside, she smiled for the first time in weeks. But across the forest, whispers began to rise. The villagers who had fled the plague had started returning one by one. And with them came stories. Stories of a blackbird that followed the scent of the dying, and of a pale man seen walking the woods when the moon was full. Eleanor heard them one afternoon at the market ruins, when a merchant passed through with firewood. They say the raven marks its prey before nightfall, the man said, spitting on the ground, and whoever feeds it is next. Eleanor froze. That's nonsense, she said quietly. It's just a bird. But the man only laughed. That's what the dead said, too. That night, Eleanor still placed her food by the wall, though her hands trembled as she did. The raven came, silent and steady. It didn't touch the food. Instead, it watched her for a long moment, its dark eyes full of sorrow. You shouldn't come any more, she whispered, her voice breaking. They'll hurt you. Or me. Cal wanted to tell her he would never let that happen, that he had protected her from the shadows every night she slept, that even if death came, he would stand between her and the dark. But he couldn't. Not yet. So he took a step forward, brushed his wing against her sleeve, then flew into the mist. Eleanor watched until he vanished. She didn't know why tears filled her eyes. I'll still leave food, she whispered into the wind, just in case you're hungry. That night, when the moon reached its highest point, Cale stood once more as a man in the forest. His cloak billowed in the wind, and his hand clenched around a black feather that glowed faintly with the curse's light. She's in danger, he muttered, and I can't stay away any more. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he stepped toward her village, his fangs glinting softly under the moonlight. He was no longer just the watcher in the dark. He was going to protect her, even if it broke the curse forever. That night, the wind howled across the dead fields like a warning. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her small candle burned low, and the shadows on the walls looked alive. She pulled the blanket closer, trying to ignore the unease creeping inside her. Somewhere outside, a branch snapped. She froze. Then came another sound, soft footsteps, too slow to be an animal's. Her heart raced. She grabbed the small knife she kept near her bed and whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. The floor creaked near the window. She turned, ready to scream. But what she saw made her voice die in her throat. A man stood outside, half hidden by the fog. His dark cloak rippled in the cold wind. His hair was long, black as the raven's wings. His eyes, they were the same storm-gray eyes she had seen every night in that bird. She stared at him, frozen in disbelief. Who are you?" she whispered. The man's voice was deep and calm. "Don't be afraid." He stepped forward, the moonlight touching his face, pale, timeless, beautiful, yet filled with pain. "You've been kind to me when no one else would," he said softly, and I could no longer stay away. Eleanor shook her head, gripping the knife tighter. "You're the raven," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Aren't you?" Kyle nodded once. "Yes." The knife slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She stumbled back, her mind spinning. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're not real. This can't be real." Kyle's eyes softened. "I am real, Eleanor. I wish I wasn't, but I am." He took a slow step toward her. She didn't move. Fear and something else held her still. "Why me?" she asked. "Why come to me?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you remind me of someone I once loved. Someone I failed to save." His words hung heavy in the air. Eleanor swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to ask more, but the world outside broke the silence before she could. Voices, rough, angry voices. She rushed to the window and saw the flicker of torches moving through the trees. The villagers, the ones who had returned, were coming. "They think you're cursed," Kyle said quietly. "They've been watching your cottage." Her hands trembled. "They'll kill you if they find you here." Kale shook his head slowly. "No, Eleanor. They'll kill you." Before she could speak, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was cold but gentle. You must leave tonight, he said firmly. Now. Eleanor looked at him, torn between fear and confusion. Where would I go? There's an old church deep in the forest. You'll be safe there until I find you again. But what about you? Cale's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. I've been hunted before. I know how to vanish. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the strange warmth she felt when he looked at her. But the voices outside were getting closer now, shouting her name. Eleanor! Someone bellowed. Come out! We know you've been feeding the demon bird. Her heart dropped. Cale turned to the window, his expression hardening. Go, he said, his tone sharp now. Take the back door and follow the stream. Don't look back. She hesitated, her throat tight with fear. Will I see you again? Kyle looked at her once more, his gray eyes burning with something that felt like a promise. You will. I swear it. Then he turned toward the door as the first torchlight hit the glass. Eleanor ran. The snow crunched under her boots as she fled through the back path, clutching her shawl tight. Behind her, voices rose, shouting, breaking wood, the sound of chaos filling the night. She didn't look back until she reached the stream. From there, she saw it, her cottage burning, flames twisting into the black sky. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Cale, she whispered. Then she saw him. Through the smoke and fire, his dark figure moved like a shadow, faster than her eyes could follow. The villagers screamed as torches went out one by one. Some fled. Others fell. Eleanor turned away, trembling. She wanted to run to him, but something in her heart told her to keep going. Hours later, she reached the old church. Its doors were half broken, and vines grew over the cracked walls. Inside, the air was still and heavy, but she felt a strange sense of safety. She lit a candle she had kept hidden in her pocket and whispered, "Please be alive." As the flame flickered, something moved in the shadows behind her. You shouldn't have come alone. She turned quickly. Cale stepped out of the dark, his face pale, a cut bleeding down his cheek. But his eyes, they were still full of that same fierce calm. Eleanor ran to him before she could stop herself. You're hurt. He shook his head. It's nothing. You're safe now. They'll come again? She said, voice breaking. They'll find us. Kyle reached out and brushed her hair back gently. Not tonight. The wind outside howled louder. The fire in the distance had turned the sky orange. Eleanor stood there, looking at him in the candlelight, the man who had watched over her all this time, the cursed soul she had unknowingly saved. What are you really? She asked softly. Cale took a long breath. I am what the old world left behind, he said, a man who once believed love could save him. And when it didn't, I became something else, a vampire. He didn't deny it. The silence that followed was heavy, not with fear, but with something fragile, unspoken. Eleanor whispered, Then why didn't you hurt me? Kyle looked at her like her question wounded him. Because you fed me with kindness before I ever hungered for blood. She didn't know what to say. She only knew her heart ached when she looked at him, and that she could never fear him again. That night, as the storm raged outside the church, Cale stood by the doorway, keeping watch. Eleanor sat by the candle, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Before she drifted to sleep, she whispered, Thank you for saving me. Cale looked at her, his voice low. You saved me first. When morning came, the church was filled with soft light. Dust floated through the air like snow, and for the first time in months, Eleanor woke to the sound of birds singing instead of silence. She sat up slowly. Kyle wasn't there. Her heart jumped. Cale? She called out quietly, her voice echoing off the stone walls. No answer. Only the wind moving through the cracks in the roof. She stood and wrapped her shawl tighter, walking toward the doorway. Outside, she found him kneeling beside an old grave. His head bowed, his cloak spread out behind him like black wings. The sun touched his shoulders, and though his skin looked almost too pale for daylight, he didn't move. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped closer. "You shouldn't be in the sun," she said softly. Cal turned, a faint smile crossing his lips. "It no longer burns me," he said, "not as it once did. My curse has weakened with time." She frowned. "Your curse?" He looked down at the grave again, brushing the snow from its worn stone. "Yes," he whispered. "This was the church where it began." Eleanor knelt beside him. The name on the grave was faded, but she could still make out a few letters. Mira. "Was she the one you told me about?" Cal nodded. His eyes softened, but pain lingered behind them. "She was a healer. Kind. Gentle. Much like you. We met during the old wars, when men fought over lands that meant nothing. I was a soldier, half alive from battle. She found me bleeding on the fields and brought me here." He paused, his voice low and distant. "For a year, she cared for me. I thought I'd found peace, but I had made enemies, cruel men who hunted anything that lived. They came one night, set fire to this church. I tried to save her." He looked up at the broken ceiling, his eyes filled with regret. "She burned before I reached her. And when I begged the gods to return her, they answered with a curse instead. They gave me wings and a hunger that never ends." Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. He had carried this pain for centuries. She reached out, gently touching his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Cal turned to her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "You shouldn't pity me, Eleanor. My curse was just. I failed her, but you've saved me," she said softly. "Maybe that means something." Before Cal could answer, a sound broke the quiet. The sharp creak of metal. He was on his feet instantly, pulling Eleanor behind him. "What is it?" she asked. Cal's eyes narrowed, scanning the tree line. "Someone's here." From the woods, a tall figure emerged, a man in a leather coat, carrying a silver-tipped spear. His hair was gray, his eyes cold as frost. "Well, well," the man said, voice rough. "I didn't think I'd find you so easily." Cal's jaw tightened. "Elric," the man smirked. "Still hiding behind churches, are you?" Eleanor looked between them, fear rising in her chest. "Who is he?" Cal didn't answer. Elric lifted his spear, the silver glinting in the pale light. "I'm the one who puts monsters back in the ground." Cal moved before Eleanor could blink. He pushed her aside, and the spear sliced through the air, missing him by inches. The sound of steel rang against stone. "Stay behind me," Cal said sharply. Elric lunged again, fast and precise. Cal dodged, but the silver grazed his arm. Smoke rose from the wound, and he gritted his teeth, eyes flashing red for the first time. Eleanor gasped. "Stop! Please! He's not what you think." Elric ignored her. "You don't know what that thing is, girl," he shouted. "It killed half my men a century ago." Cal's voice was low, trembling with anger. "They slaughtered Mira." "Don't speak of them." Elric's eyes narrowed. "And now you've found a new girl to curse, haven't you?" Eleanor stepped forward before Cal could stop her. "He's not a curse," she cried. "He saved me." Elric looked at her as if she were lost. "You poor child," he said coldly. "They all say that before he drains them." Cal growled, a deep, ancient sound that shook the air. "I told you to leave me in peace." Elric lifted his spear again. "And I told you monsters don't get peace." The fight broke out in a blur. Steel clashed with inhuman speed. Cal's movements were graceful, almost unreal. Centuries of battle living in every strike. Elric fought like a man possessed, the silver blade glowing brighter with every swing. Eleanor screamed as Cal stumbled, the spear cutting through his side. Smoke hissed from the wound. "Cal!" He turned, his voice strained. "Run, Eleanor!" But she didn't. She grabbed the fallen candle and threw it toward Elric's cloak. It caught fire instantly, distracting him long enough for Cale to strike. With one swift movement, he tore the spear from Elric's hands and sent him crashing into the wall. The old stone cracked, dust fell. Elric lay still. Cale stood over him, breathing hard, his eyes glowing faintly red. Eleanor took a hesitant step forward. Cale, stop. He looked at her, his fangs showing now, his expression torn between rage and pain. Then he turned away and sank to his knees. I didn't want this, he whispered. Not again. Eleanor dropped beside him, pressing her hand to the wound on his side. You're hurt. He laughed bitterly. I've been hurt for 100 years. Hours later, when the fire was out and Elric's body was gone, vanished into the woods, perhaps still alive, Eleanor sat beside Cale in the cold church. His head rested against the wall, his eyes closed. She looked at him quietly, the candlelight dancing across his face. You could have killed him, she said softly. I'm tired of killing, Cale murmured, but he'll return. Men like him always do, Eleanor's heart ached. Then I'll stay with you. Until he does, Cale opened his eyes slowly, meeting her gaze. You shouldn't say that. I mean it, she whispered. You've watched over me long enough. Let me watch over you now. For the first time in 100 years, Cale didn't feel cursed. He felt seen. He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand and held it. As the candle burned low and dawn crept through the cracks in the wall, for 2 days, Cale didn't wake. Eleanor stayed beside him, keeping a small fire alive in the broken church, tending to his wounds with what little she had. Every so often, his body would shudder, as if fighting something unseen. The cut from the silver spear hadn't healed. It bled faintly, even after she'd wrapped it with cloth. Eleanor pressed a hand to his forehead. His skin was cold, too cold. Please, she whispered, don't leave me too. The candle beside her flickered, and for a moment she thought she saw the shadow of wings spread across the floor. She looked up, but it was gone. On the third night, Cale stirred. Eleanor. His voice was weak, rough as if he'd been silent for years. She rushed to him, relief washing over her. You're awake. He opened his eyes slowly, the gray in them softer now, almost human. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. I told you I'm not leaving, she said firmly. You saved my life. Now it's my turn. Cale gave a faint smile, one that barely reached his eyes. I never thought anyone would say that to me again. Eleanor sat beside him, handing him a small cup of water. You need to rest. The wound, it won't heal, Cale interrupted quietly. Not from silver. It burns through my blood. Her heart sank. Then there must be something I can do. There isn't, he said softly. Unless. He stopped, his voice fading. Unless what? Cale hesitated. There's a way to cleanse the curse completely. But it comes with a price I'm not sure you'd want to pay. Eleanor leaned closer. Tell me. He looked at her. Really looked, as if trying to decide if she was strong enough to hear it. The curse was tied to Mira's death. To the promise I broke, if someone gives their life freely for mine, the curse ends. Eleanor's heart went still. So, someone would have to die for you to live? Cale nodded slowly. And I won't let that happen again. The night grew colder. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, covering the forest in silence. Eleanor didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the small flame between them, her thoughts spinning. Then softly she said, What if the gods didn't curse you for failing Mira, but for giving up? Cale turned to her. What do you mean? You said you begged them to bring her back, and when they didn't, you stopped living. Maybe your punishment wasn't for love. Maybe it was for losing it. Her words hit him deeper than she knew. For a long time, Cale said nothing. Then he whispered, "You sound like her." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Maybe I was meant to." He looked at her with quiet wonder, as though seeing her for the first time. The next morning, the storm eased. Eleanor stepped outside to gather snow water, her breath fogging in the cold air. The forest was still, too still. When she turned back toward the church, she saw something on the door, a mark, drawn in red, a circle crossed by 3 lines, the sign of the hunters. Her heart pounded. "They found us," she whispered. She ran inside. "Kyle, we have to go." He tried to rise, but winced in pain. His wound had worsened. The veins near it had turned dark, spreading slowly across his chest. "Elric must have marked you with silver dust," Kyle muttered. "It's tracking me." Eleanor grabbed her bag and his cloak. "Then we'll move before they get here." "You don't understand," Cale said. "If I leave this place, the wound will spread faster." "The church's ground is consecrated. It slows it. Then I'll fight for you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Kyle almost laughed, not mockingly, but with disbelief at her courage. "You can't fight trained hunters." "I can try," she said. "I won't let them take you." That night, they came. Elric wasn't alone this time. 4 men followed him, all wearing black cloaks and carrying torches that burned blue from blessed oil. Cale pushed himself to his feet, clutching the wall for balance. His eyes glowed faintly red again. "Stay behind me, Eleanor." Elric's voice rang through the church. "You should have stayed dead, Cale." Cale stepped forward. "And you should have learned when to stop chasing ghosts." Elric sneered. "You think I'll let you curse another girl?" "She's not cursed," Cale growled. The hunters rushed forward. Cale moved with desperate strength, his movements slower than before but still deadly. He caught one man's arm, twisting it until bone cracked, then dodged another's blade, but the wound in his side reopened. Blood dripped onto the church floor, dark and steaming. "Eleanor!" he shouted. "Run!" But Eleanor didn't run. She grabbed a fallen torch and struck one of the hunters from behind. He fell, his weapon clattering away. "Eleanor, go!" She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." Cale's breath came in ragged gasps. The curse was burning through him now. The world blurred, his strength fading. Elric lunged, driving the silver spear straight toward Cale's chest, and Eleanor stepped in front of him. The spear pierced her shoulder. Cale's scream tore through the night. He caught her before she fell, his hands trembling. "No, no, no, no." Eleanor's face was pale, but she managed a weak smile. "Looks like I saved you again." "Eleanor, you foolish girl." He pressed his hand to the wound, but the blood wouldn't stop. "Why would you do that?" "Because—" She struggled to breathe. "No one should die alone." Kyle's eyes filled with tears, the first he'd shed in centuries. Behind him, Elric raised the spear again. Cale turned, fury erupting through him like fire. His eyes blazed red, his fangs bared. He moved faster than lightning. In one strike, he shattered the spear and threw Elric across the church. The hunters fled in terror. Only the sound of Eleanor's shallow breaths remained. Cale knelt beside her, his voice shaking. "Hold on. Please." Her fingers brushed his cheek. "You're warm now," she whispered. "Maybe that means your curse is ending." Cale realized then she had done what he refused to let happen. She had given her life freely for his. And the gods had listened. Light began to fill the church, golden and soft, unlike the sun. It spread across the walls, across the graves, until it reached Cale and Eleanor. The darkness in his wound faded. His eyes turned human again. But Eleanor's breathing slowed. "Don't go," he whispered, tears falling. "Please, not you too." She smiled faintly. "Then find me again, wherever the light takes me." And with that, she went still. Cale held her close, the light fading around them. The curse was gone, but so was the only person who made him feel alive again. He sat there for hours, silent, holding her in his arms. When dawn came, he carried her to the grave beside Mira's, and as he buried her, he whispered, "You freed me, Eleanor. But I'll never be free from you." Snow fell again that night, covering the graves in a soft white blanket. The wind howled through the trees, but Cale didn't move. He sat in front of Eleanor's grave until dawn. The church behind him was silent, empty, like him. He had been cursed for centuries, and now, when it finally ended, he felt no peace, only loss. Kyle reached into his cloak and pulled out the small silver pendant Eleanor always wore, a tiny raven carved into the metal. Old, simple, beautiful. She'd said once it was all she had left from her mother. He held it tightly. "You are the only light left in this world," he whispered. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, a sound echoed. Caw. A single raven's cry. Kyle looked up sharply. A black bird perched on a branch nearby watching him. Its eyes glimmered with a faint silver glow, the same shade as Eleanor's pendant. His chest tightened. No, it can't be. The raven tilted its head, as if recognizing his voice. Kyle stood slowly. "Eleanor," he whispered. The raven spread its wings and flew toward the mountains, toward the old fortress where Kale once lived when he was still human. For a long moment he hesitated. Then he picked up his sword, wrapped Eleanor's pendant around his wrist, and followed. The journey was long and harsh. Snow turned to rain, and the forest thinned into rocky cliffs. Kyle barely rested, barely ate. He moved like a man chasing the last piece of his soul. Every night, the raven waited for him, perched on a rock or a tree, always leading him onward. When Kale reached the base of the mountains, he saw it, his old fortress. Once a place of laughter, now just ruins swallowed by moss and time. He stopped at the broken gate. "You brought me here," he said to the raven. "But why?" The bird fluttered down and landed near a small pool of water. Its reflection shimmered strangely. Not a raven's image, but something faintly human. Kel knelt. "Eleanor." "If that's you." The water rippled, and he heard a whisper, soft and distant. "Kyle." His breath caught. "I'm here." The voice trembled like the wind. "You shouldn't have followed." "I can't let you go," he said. "Not again." "You're free now," the whisper said. "Don't lose that for me." Kyle clenched his fists. "Freedom means nothing without you." The pool shimmered once more, this time showing Eleanor's face, pale and glowing faintly with silver light. "You must finish what I started," she said. "The curse is broken for you, but not for the land." "What do you mean?" "The curse that bound your blood also bound this valley," Eleanor said. "That's why it's always cold, always dark. It feeds on sorrow. Yours, Mira's, mine." Kale's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then tell me what I must do." "Go to the heart of the mountain," she said, "where you made the vow to the gods." That's where it began. That's where it must end. The reflection faded, leaving only ripples behind. Kyle stared at the still water, his heart heavy. "Then I'll go," he said quietly, "for you." The raven cawed once, softly, and took flight again. The mountain's path was cruel. The air grew thin, the ground slick with ice. But Kale didn't stop. Every step he took, he thought of Eleanor's voice, her warmth, her smile. By the third night, he reached the cave, an ancient hollow carved into the mountain's heart. Inside, faint runes glowed along the walls, the same words he'd carved centuries ago in his grief. "Let my soul live on until her light returns." Kale traced the marks with his hand. His younger self had made this curse, not the gods. He had begged them for power. He had wanted to see Mira again. He had trapped himself. Now, standing there again, he finally understood. It wasn't a curse, he said quietly. It was my wish that turned against me. The raven perched on a stone behind him, watching. Cale took out Eleanor's pendant. You freed me from my own chains, he whispered. Now I'll free this land too. He held the pendant above the runes. Its silver gleamed, catching the faint light. Then, closing his eyes, he whispered an oath. I release my soul from the promise of the past. Let her light guide me, not bind me. A burst of wind swept through the cave, and the runes blazed with white fire. Kyle staggered, gripping the wall as visions flooded his mind. Mira's laughter, her death, the years of wandering, and finally Eleanor's face, smiling through tears. The fire spread, racing across the stone, then burst outward like a wave of light. When it faded, the cave was silent. The runes were gone. The curse had ended completely. Kyle fell to his knees, exhausted but free. For the first time in centuries, the world around him felt alive. The snow outside had stopped. The mountain air was warm. The raven landed beside him and looked into his eyes. Thank you, Kyle said softly. The bird blinked, and a single silver feather fell from its wing, glowing faintly before fading into the air. Kyle smiled faintly. Goodbye, Eleanor. He walked out of the cave and looked toward the valley below. The first sunlight in years touched the forest. The graves near the church would finally thaw. Weeks later, travelers passing through the valley spoke of strange things. They said the old ruins now had blooming flowers around them. Even in winter, they said a lone man sometimes walked through the woods at night, leaving no footprints. And sometimes, when the moon was high, a raven with silver eyes flew above him, circling quietly, as if watching over him still. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet for Cale. For centuries he had lived in shadows, chained to a curse that would never let him rest. Now, the silence of freedom felt heavy. He built a small shelter near the forest edge, close to the river where Eleanor once sat feeding the raven. Every evening he would sit by the water, listening to the current flow past, remembering the sound of her laughter echoing through the cold air. Sometimes he spoke aloud, not expecting an answer, but just to hear her name again. Eleanor, he said softly one evening, watching the sun fade. If you were here, you'd tell me not to be foolish, wouldn't you? A faint breeze stirred the trees, and a few petals from a wild flower drifted into the water. Kyle smiled faintly. I'll take that as a yes. Weeks passed. The valley slowly began to change. Snow melted earlier that year. The trees grew greener, and the birds, real birds, returned. People began to wander through again, drawn by stories of the forest that had once been cursed. They saw the ruins, the thawed graves, the flowers growing from the cracks in the stones. They said the place was blessed now, guarded by something kind. Cale never showed himself to them. He watched from a distance, cloaked in shadow, his heart calm but not empty. One morning, as he prepared to leave the valley, he heard a sound behind him. Footsteps, soft and unsure. He turned slowly. A young woman stood there, holding a basket of berries. Her hair was dark brown, her eyes bright green. Not silver like Eleanor's, but something in their depth made him pause. I'm sorry, she said quickly, startled by his gaze. I didn't mean to intrude. I come here sometimes to gather food. Cal nodded. You're not intruding. She hesitated, then smiled shyly. I've never seen anyone living here before. Everyone says the valley's haunted. He raised an eyebrow. Do you believe them? She laughed softly. I think the valley's lonely, not haunted. That laugh, soft and kind, felt like sunlight on cold skin. What's your name? He asked quietly. Lyra, she said. And you? He hesitated, then answered, Kyle. Lyra looked at him for a moment, as if trying to recall the name. Then she nodded. It suits you. Over the next few days, Lyra returned often. She brought food from her village and sometimes stayed to talk. Kyle listened more than he spoke, but she didn't seem to mind. He learned she lived alone with her grandmother in a cottage by the far hills. She had come to the valley because she liked the silence. It made her feel close to something she couldn't name. Once, as they sat by the river, Lyra said, I've always dreamed of a raven. It used to come to my window when I was little. My grandmother said it was bad luck, but I never felt afraid. It looked sad. Kyle's heart stopped for a moment. He forced his voice to remain calm. Did it have silver in its feathers? She looked surprised. Yes, just a few, near the wings. You've seen it too? Kyle looked at the river where the sunlight danced. Once, he said softly, a long time ago. That night, Kale couldn't sleep. He sat outside staring at the stars. Could it be? He whispered to himself, Eleanor, did you come back? He didn't know. He didn't need to. All he knew was that the valley no longer felt empty. And when Lyra smiled, something deep inside him stirred, like a memory waking from a long dream. The next morning, Lyra came running down the hill, her hair loose, her face bright with excitement. Kyle, she called. He turned. What happened? She held out her hands. Resting in her palms was a single silver feather, smooth, shining faintly in the light. I found this near the church, she said. It's strange, isn't it? Kyle stared at it in silence. The feather shimmered, just like the one that had fallen from the raven's wing that day. He reached out slowly, his voice soft. Keep it. It suits you. She smiled, and for a brief moment, just a flicker, Kyle thought he saw something in her eyes, a reflection of moonlight, a memory of a promise. That night, Kyle dreamed for the first time in years. He was standing by the river, and Eleanor stood before him. Not a ghost, not a shadow, but alive, radiant, smiling. You found me, she said. He took a step toward her. You never left? She reached out, touching his face with her hand. Maybe I was always meant to find my way back. When Kyle woke, the morning sun filled the room, and outside his window, a raven perched on the branch, watching him quietly, before spreading its wings and flying toward the mountains. The days grew longer. The snow melted into soft streams that ran through the valley like silver threads. Kyle found himself smiling again, something he hadn't done in a lifetime. Lyra visited often, sometimes with food, sometimes just with stories from her village. She laughed easily, even when Kale didn't answer much. Do you ever get tired of silence? She asked one day. He looked up from the small fire they shared. No, he said honestly. Silence used to be my only company. Lyra poked at the fire with a stick, thinking, then maybe that's why I like it here, she said softly. I don't mind silence either. It feels like someone is listening. Kale turned his gaze away, his chest tight. Eleanor, he thought. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. That evening, Lyra stayed longer than usual. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned deep blue. The river shimmered in the fading light. Kale sat beside her, watching the stars appear one by one. Do you ever feel like you've lived before? She asked suddenly. He hesitated. Yes, he said finally, and I've spent too long trying to forget it. Lyra looked at him. Then why does your voice sound like someone I've known forever? Kale didn't answer. He couldn't. The air between them grew still, heavy with unspoken things. Then softly, Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't know why, she whispered, but I feel safe with you. Kale closed his eyes. You always were, he thought. Days turned into weeks. Cal began to teach Lyra how to use herbs from the forest, how to track animals, how to listen to the river. In return, she told him stories, small things about people, laughter and dreams. One evening, as they walked back to the cabin, Lyra stopped suddenly. "Cal," she said quietly, pointing toward the ground. A circle of silver feathers lay scattered in the grass, untouched by wind, glowing faintly in the twilight. Cal knelt down, his heart pounding. "It's happening again," he whispered. "What is?" He looked up at her, his eyes dark. "The past, trying to return." Before she could answer, the wind blew through the valley, carrying a whisper, soft, almost like a voice. "Cale." Lyra gasped and stepped back. "Did you hear that?" Kyle stood slowly. "Yes." The sound came again, drifting from the woods. A woman's voice, faint and sorrowful. Without thinking, Kyle took Lyra's hand. "Stay close," he said. They followed the sound through the trees, past the ruins of the old church, until they reached the small graveyard. The voice stopped. Only silence remained, and a single candle flickered on Eleanor's grave. Cal stared at it, his breath shallow. "No one comes here," he whispered. Lyra looked around nervously. "Then who lit it?" Cal didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the grave, on the name carved faintly into the stone. "Eleanor." Lyra stepped closer, kneeling beside it. "This is her," she said softly. "The one you lost." Cale's eyes widened slightly. "How do you know that?" "I don't know," she whispered, her hand hovering over the name. "It just feels like I do." The candle flame flickered, and for a brief moment, a soft silver light surrounded her hand. Kyle felt the air shift, the same energy that once carried Eleanor's presence. "Lyra," he said, voice trembling. "Step back." She looked at him confused. "Why?" "What's happening?" Before he could speak, the flame grew brighter, not burning, but glowing like the moon itself. And then, faintly, Cal heard her voice again. "Eleanor." He turned, but it came from everywhere, from the air, the ground, the sky. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "Cale?" she whispered. "I can hear her too." The candle went out. Darkness returned. They didn't speak on the way back. Kyle walked in silence, lost in thought. When they reached the cabin, Lyra sat quietly by the fire. Finally, she said, "Cale." "Am I her?" He didn't look at her. "I don't know. But you think I might be." He took a slow breath. "I think your soul remembers things your heart has forgotten." Lyra's eyes softened. "And if that's true?" Kyle turned toward her, his voice low. "Then it means the gods gave me one more chance not to lose you again." She didn't speak. She just reached across the fire and took his hand. For the first time in centuries, Cale didn't feel cursed. He didn't feel trapped. He just felt alive. That night, Cale dreamed again. He stood in the same graveyard, moonlight washing over the stones. This time, Eleanor was standing there, not as a ghost or vision, but solid, breathing, real. "You found her," she said softly. Cale's throat tightened. "Eleanor." "She doesn't know yet," Eleanor said. "Don't force her to remember. Some memories bring pain that shouldn't return." He stepped closer. "You're here because of her, aren't you?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "She carries what I left behind. My kindness, my courage, maybe even my love. That's all I ever wanted to give you." Kyle reached for her, but she began to fade, her form breaking into white light. "Wait," he said. "Tell me what to do." Her voice drifted through the wind as she disappeared. "Let her live her life, Cal. Don't make her live mine." Cal woke before dawn, his heart pounding. The fire had gone out. Lyra was still asleep near the hearth, her face peaceful, her hand clutching the silver feather. He sat quietly, watching her breathe. She looked so much like Eleanor in that light. But she wasn't her. Not completely. He whispered, "What are you, Lyra? A soul reborn or a gift to test mine?" The morning light crept slowly through the cracks in the wall. Over the next few days, things changed. Lyra began to remember fragments she couldn't explain. Once, while helping Kale gather water, she stopped and touched the river's surface. "This place," she said softly, "I've been here before, but I've never left the village until now." Kale glanced at her. "What do you remember?" She frowned, struggling. "Someone waiting." "A man. I used to bring him food. He looked at me the way you do sometimes." Kale's breath caught. "And then," she shook her head, her eyes distant. "Then the river turned red." He froze. That memory wasn't Lyra's. It was Eleanor's, from the night he had turned into the raven. Kale looked away, his voice low. "You don't need to remember that." "But it feels like I should," she said quietly, "like part of me is missing." That evening, Kale walked alone into the forest. He stood beneath the old oak where the raven's nest once was and whispered to the air, "Why her?" "Why again?" The wind didn't answer. Only the distant cry of a bird, soft, haunting, familiar, echoed through the night. He closed his eyes. "If she's truly you, Eleanor, what am I supposed to do now?" When he returned, Lyra was gone. The cabin door was open, and footprints led toward the church. Cal ran through the woods, fear cutting through his chest. He found her kneeling before Eleanor's grave again, the candle burning once more beside her. She turned as he approached, her face pale but calm. "I remember." Cale stopped. "Lyra, I remember everything," she said. "The raven. The nights, the way you used to look at me before you vanished into the dark tears filled her eyes. You were the raven." Kyle stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Yes." She smiled weakly. "Then you've been watching over me for longer than I've been alive." He nodded slowly. "I couldn't stop." Lyra looked down at the grave, at her own name carved into stone. "I was her once, but I'm not anymore." Cal knelt beside her. "You don't have to be. You're Lyra now." "But part of me still loves you," she whispered, "even if I don't remember all of it." He closed his eyes. "And I'll love you in every life you live." The candle flame flickered. The air shimmered faintly with silver light, wrapping around them both like a soft veil. For a moment, the world was still. The graves, the trees, the sky, everything felt suspended in silence. Then the light faded, and the flame went out again. Cale opened his eyes to find Lyra leaning against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I don't want to remember everything," she said quietly. "I just want to start again." He smiled faintly. "Then let's start again." They stayed there until morning, watching the first rays of sunlight fall across the graveyard, not as mourners, but as two souls who had finally found peace in the same world. Weeks passed. The snow melted from the trees, and green began to return to the forest. Cale and Lyra stayed in the small cabin, slowly building a life that felt almost human. Each morning, she gathered herbs, cooked simple meals, and laughed softly when Kyle tried to help and failed miserably. At night, she told him stories she half remembered, tales from a life that wasn't hers, but that still felt real. Cale listened in silence, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking away when she said something that struck too close to old wounds. One night, as they sat by the fire, she said, "Do you ever wish you could start your life again?" He stared into the flames. "Every night for 100 years. And if you could?" "I'd find her sooner," he said softly. Lyra's heart stirred. "You mean me?" Cal hesitated, then nodded. "You." The next morning, a messenger arrived from the nearby town, a young boy carrying a letter sealed in black wax. He bowed nervously when he saw Kale. "Sir, there's a sickness spreading." "The villagers ask for your help." Kale frowned. "Why come to me?" "They say you have knowledge of herbs and healing, and that you never get sick." Lyra looked at him, concern in her eyes. "You should go." "You could save them." Kel shook his head. "It's dangerous." "The sickness. I've seen enough death to know that hiding from it doesn't save anyone," she said firmly. "We'll go together." He hesitated, then finally nodded. The village was worse than Kale expected. Dozens lay fevered and pale, coughing blood, their eyes clouded with fear. The smell of sickness filled the air. Lyra helped the women wash the sick, her gentle hands easing their pain. Cal worked through the night mixing herbs, using old knowledge from centuries ago. But soon he realized this wasn't a natural illness. It spread too fast, drained too deeply. He followed the scent through the alleys and found traces of blood magic, a ritual carved into the walls of the old chapel. Someone had cursed the village. He touched the markings, and his blood ran cold. This magic, he'd seen it before. It belonged to the same witch who had taken his life centuries ago, the one who cursed him to walk as a raven. That night, Cal told Lyra everything. Her name was Isolde. She was the one who turned me, made me what I am. Lyra's face paled. Why would she curse this village? Cale's eyes darkened. Because of you. She knows you carry Eleanor's soul. She'll try to take it again. Lyra shook her head, fear flickering in her eyes. Then we run. No, Cale said. If we run, she'll follow. I have to end it. They waited until midnight. The wind howled as Cale stood before the chapel, cloak billowing, eyes glowing faintly red. From the shadows, a woman stepped out, pale, ageless, and cruelly beautiful. Still playing protector, little raven? She sneered. How many centuries will it take for you to learn? Cale's voice was steady. I learned long ago that monsters can be beaten. Isolde smiled, lifting her hand. Then come. Let's finish what we started. The battle was silent and terrible. Wind and fire tore through the chapel. Lyra, watching from the door, could barely see through the storm of light and shadow. Cale's strength faltered, centuries of restraint breaking all at once. He struck, not as a raven or a man, but as something in between. Wings of darkness unfurling behind him. With one final blow, he drove his blade through her chest. Isolde gasped, laughter turning to a hiss. You can't kill what made you, she whispered. Kel leaned close. Then I'll bury you with what's left of me. He whispered an old incantation, a curse he'd sworn never to use, and the chapel burst into light. When the flames died, only silence remained. Lyra ran to him, tears streaming down her face. Cale! He lay on the ground, pale and still, the curse burning faintly beneath his skin. She held him, sobbing. Please, stay with me. Cale opened his eyes weakly. It's all right, little one. The curse needed a soul to end it. I gave mine back. No, she cried. You can't leave me again. He smiled faintly. You've already set me free. Then his body began to fade, like mist dissolving in morning light. Lyra clutched at him, but her hands passed through air. Cale, please. His voice whispered in her ear, soft as the rustle of wings. Feed the raven, Eleanor, and remember me. Then he was gone. Lyra stayed kneeling for a long time. When she finally rose, the first light of dawn broke over the ruins of the chapel. A single raven feather lay on the ground, silver, glimmering faintly in the light. She picked it up, holding it to her heart. The forest was silent. The curse was gone. But she knew. Somewhere he was watching still. The village began to heal. The sickness faded with the passing weeks, and new flowers bloomed where ashes had fallen. But Lyra's heart stayed quiet, caught between grief and something she couldn't name. Every night, she walked to the edge of the forest where the ravens gathered on the trees. She placed a bowl of berries beneath the old oak, the same way she used to when Kyle was still a shadow in her life. "Come back," she whispered to the wind, "even if it's only for a moment." The birds watched, silent and still, and sometimes, when the moonlight hit the branches just right, she swore one of them had silver in its feathers. Months turned into years. The villagers told stories of the dark guardian who saved them, a man who came from the woods and vanished in firelight. Lyra never corrected them. She only smiled faintly and went back to her work, helping those who came to her for herbs and comfort. Her hands grew older, her heart softer. But the memory of Kale never left. One evening, while she sat by the river, she noticed something glimmering in the water, a feather, silver and dark, floating gently toward her. She reached out, touched it, and suddenly the world went silent. The forest around her shifted, the colors deepened, the air grew thick with warmth. She looked up, and standing on the opposite bank was Kale. He looked the same as he always had, calm, strong, eyes full of quiet sadness. But now there was peace in his face. "Kale," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Is it really you?" He smiled softly. "For a moment. The curse is gone, but I can still walk between worlds when the one who freed me calls my name." Lyra's heart broke open. "I've missed you every day." He stepped closer, the river glowing faintly between them. "And I've watched over you every night." The wind stirred the trees. The world held its breath. She reached out her hand. "Will it hurt if I touch you?" He shook his head. "Not this time." Their fingers met, warm against warm for the first time. It felt like every moment they'd lost had found them again. Kale looked at her with the same quiet love that had always lived behind his eyes. "You carried her soul," he said softly. "Eleanor's. But you gave it life again, in your own way. You were never just her, Lyra. You were always you." Lyra smiled through tears. "And you were never a monster. You were my home." Cal stepped forward and rested his hand against her cheek. "Then I can leave this world knowing I found it." As dawn began to rise, he looked toward the horizon. "It's time," he whispered. Lyra clutched his hand. "Please, don't go." "I have to," he said gently. "But this time, I'll go where I was meant to. Not into shadow, but into light." He leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. The warmth lingered, like sunlight through glass. Then, slowly, his body turned to silver mist. The last of him shimmered in the morning light, drifting upward like feathers on the wind. Lyra stood there, smiling through her tears. Years later, the villagers spoke of a woman who tended the forest alone, always kind, always gentle, and always feeding the ravens that gathered by her window. They said, when she passed, the birds flew in circles above her house for 3 nights straight, their feathers shining like silver. And when they finally left, one raven remained. It perched on her window and sang at dawn, a sound so soft it made the flowers bloom early that year. Some said it was just a bird. Others swore it was the soul of a man who had waited 100 years for one more kiss. And on quiet nights, when the moonlight touched the trees, you could still hear her voice whisper through the forest, "Feed the raven and remember me."